Hey everybody, welcome to our second panel. We're discussing race relations here in our area. My name is Robin Steele. I'm the pastor of Promised Land Church, and we're really glad to have you with us today. This is my wife, Erica, and we have been residents here in San Marcos for, we've been around San Marcos working here at the church for 17 years now. We planted the church 17 years ago. I went to school here from 94 to 98 at Texas State. So been in the area a long time. And today we're joined by two amazing guests. We have right here on my left, Nathaniel Dedebamfu. He is the GIS Services Supervisor. Specialist. At Texas State University. This is Dr. Nathaniel Dedebamfu. We're honored to have him as a part of our church family. So thank you for being here today. Over here on this side is Ms. Denisha Presley, and she is currently the high school principal at San Marcos High School, but you've served at Lockhart, you've served many hats here in San Marcos. You were at Lehman High School principal, and now San Marcos principal. So thank you for being with us as well. I want to throw the first question over here to Dr. Nathaniel. You have a very interesting story, and I want you to share some of your story with us. I want Ms. Presley to also share her story, because the idea of these panels is not for us to solve anything or to speak for a whole generation or a whole race or a whole people group. It's just to tell our stories, because I feel like more than someone watching this and really like having this big epiphany of, wow, my life has changed, I feel like it's helpful for people just to see what conversation can look like. And so I'm going to ask you questions, and you feel free to ask me questions if you want. And Erica is going to ask questions. But so I'd love to just hear, your story. You have a unique experience here in U.S. Why don't you tell everybody kind of where you're from, how you got here to San Marcos?
All right. First, thank you so much, Pastor, for this opportunity. I think it's really important, especially in times like these. Always communication is very crucial in every form of relationship, so I believe it's in order. So my name is Nathaniel Dedebamfu, and I'm originally from Ghana, and I came to the U.S. in the fall of 2008. Purposefully to come and study. So I came here for my master's. I got my bachelor's from Ghana in geography and resource development. So through my supervisor in Ghana, he had a colleague here, so he reached out that they were recruiting new grad student and asked if I was interested, and I said sure. So there was a specific course, a GIS, and I said, yeah, I've been looking forward to learning that. So when the opportunity came, I applied, went through the process, and by God's grace, I got accepted into the program. So I came, and that was in fall of 2008. So I came here, started in Binghamton, New York, upstate New York, from a very warm weather to a very cold place. Yeah. Binghamton is a very exciting place, very interesting. However, it's very cold. So I was there for 2 years studying geography with emphasis on GIS and cartography, making of maps. And for those who are not aware, GIS is basically using computer technology to create maps, do other analysis like interpret why things should be located where they are, what decisions should go into it. And also in the middle of COVID-19, we see a lot of maps. Why do we have some concentrations over here and not over there? So GIS help us to do these things. So I finished with that, and I thought, I was just finishing and then maybe just going back. But after I finished, my advisor talked me into, considering doing my PhD. And I said, sure, I'm interested. So that was when I started applying. I put in several applications, and thankfully, Texas State accepted me with funding, basically. So the funding is an assistantship. They will recruit you as a teaching assistant. So whilst you are teaching, you get some stipend, which help you to pay your tuition. So,
Let me ask you a quick question.
Yes.
When you did your master's, did you have to fund that yourself, or did you get a scholarship for the master's?
yeah, I skipped that part, but it was also funded.
Okay.
Yeah, I received teaching assistantship. So upstate New York, they pay for your tuition, and then they give you some stipend. So whilst you are doing your program, you are also working part-time in the department.
Okay.
So it was a huge blessing for me.
So you got to San Marcos, went through your PhD program, graduated last year or 2 years?
3 years ago.
3 years ago.
That's right.
And so now you are working here at Texas State.
Yes, sir. Yeah, so I finished my master's and then came to San Marcos. That was 2010 fall. Began the program, and it took me a little bit because sometimes your topics change when you are in the PhD program.
Okay.
So my topics kept changing, but thank God I finally got it done.
Yeah, yeah.
I got a push from my wife. Said, "When are you going to finish being a student? I'm tired." So I said, "Okay, I'm going to do it." And eventually, I wrapped everything up, graduated in 2017. But before graduating, I saw this job posting advertised in the Alkek Library. So I applied for it. That was in 2015. And I got accepted. I was hired, and I've been working there since that time. So.
And you have a beautiful wife, Ahinawa.
That's
and
right.
You now have a baby girl.
Yes.
That's 6 months old.
That's right. Yes.
Wow. So I'm curious, you were in New York for 2.5 years, and
2
then
years.
and then you came to San Marcos, Texas.
That's
right. You've been here for 10 years, I guess.
Yes.
Or so. So tell me, was there any difference living in New York, being a man of color versus being in San Marcos?
I wouldn't say upstate New York is totally different from New York City.
Okay.
So New York City, it's a huge city with so many people. Upstate New York is more laid back. But generally, my experience with people have mostly been within the school and then church.
Okay.
So I leave home, go to school, and then go to church.
Yes.
Or I just go to the grocery store. But I've had wonderful experiences. Actually, our daughter, Darlene, was named after one of my best friends. They are a white couple in New York, Darlene and Robert Sessions. And they took me as their own son. They opened their home. I could visit them anytime I wanted. They would just come and pick me up from home to church, and they will buy me groceries. And to tell you how deep the relationship has been, the lady, Darlene, will even bake cookies from New York, box it, and send it to me here in San Marcos. They were just wonderful people. So in terms of relationship within the church, it was wonderful. I never had any issues with people around. The only difference I would say is Texas, people are more open. People are more friendly. You don't have to know somebody. They will just bump into you and then start a conversation with you. And here, you know, you meet a lot of people in the park, in church, and all that. So that is the big difference I found. In New York, upstate New York, I would say probably because it's always cold. So people are always indoors, you know.
Yeah.
In the summer, you go outside, but it's quite different. Yet, I never had any kind of strange. It was very wonderful.
When you come here from Africa and you move to U.S., when you see people in the U.S. of different color, do you have any feeling or connection or any sort of social differences between different races here in the U.S.? I'm just curious what it's like to come from the outside and say, like, do you feel more connected to the blacks in the U.S. than the whites, or not?
That's a very interesting question. So Ghana, like you acknowledge, is more homogeneous, mostly blacks. We have a few expatriates, you know, Lebanese, Indians, but majority of us are just of African origin.
Right.
So definitely, I was used to that culture. I had my cultural biases and some kind of stereotypes and prejudice and all that. So I was always on edge, you know. I'm like, okay, I'm going to a different culture. What should I expect? Can I trust everyone and all that? So I had some kind of barrier around me, you know, fence around me. However, I began opening up when I realized that, oh, they are nice people. Okay, so as people opened up, I started opening up. Like the couple I talked about, they were being super nice to me, and I was like, what are they trying to do?
Right.
You know, they are trying to get me to do something or what. So I was always
Really?
like that. However, I realized that no, these are just wonderful people. They are just trying to be nice, and over and over and over. So it allowed me to open up. Regarding other races, on campus, I met other Africans. I met a lot of African Americans, and it's been normal. It's just that for me, I was more connected with people I shared certain interests with. So, like, if you are white, African American, Asian, and we share common interests, like in the church, definitely I had that connection. There were other people I didn't have so much connection, even though we were of similar heritage or background, but there was very little in common. So that was my experience.
So when you first went to church in New York, how did you pick that church? Was it
All right.
what was the racial mix in that church?
That church, so first, back in Ghana, I was a Christian, and I was part of the Assemblies of God church. So when I came to New York, I started Googling around. So I wanted to attend church. So the first thing, let me see if there's an Assemblies of God. There were other churches like Presbyterian, Methodist, and all that. If there were no Assemblies of God, I would just go to any Christian denomination. But I found that there was an Assemblies of God just about a walking distance from my place.
Oh.
Yeah, not too far, maybe half a mile,
Okay.
I would say. I could just walk. I was used to walking a lot, so
Yeah, it was no big
when
deal.
I found that, I was like, hey, this is it. So I went to church the first Sunday. It was predominantly white, but there were some African Americans and then other Africans over there. And for me, even though most of the time I went to the first service. So in the first service, you had very few, there wasn't too much, like, how will I describe it? We didn't have a lot of diversity in the first service. But because I was a grad student, I wanted to get it done, finish church, and then go and do my work. So first service, mostly white, I would just be in there. There were a few other African students who would be sitting around. So I don't know, but
No.
I was just there.
Interesting.
Worship God, and then people will come say hello, hi, and yeah.
Yeah.
And that's when I
Gotcha.
developed those relationships.
Yeah.
So
Awesome.
yeah.
That's great.
Do y'all have any questions for him? No?
Not yet.
Okay, we're going to come back to you.
All right.
Are you having?
I do have a question. So it seemed, because there's this notion that African natives and African Americans have there's this built-in tension. Did you experience? And I asked that. Well, did you have any of those kind of experiences when you came to the States?
I've heard of that. And I don't know, but I have some African American friends around, and that has never come up.
Okay.
But I don't know. Some of my friends who are also Africans have expressed those to me, that there are certain tensions, but I don't know. I've never really experienced that tension. I've never really experienced that tension. So maybe somebody has it. I don't know. I don't have that. So yeah, but I've heard it. It's something very common amongst. It's a notion many Africans share, but personally, no, I've never experienced any of that. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks.
When did you meet Ohenewa, and when did y'all get married?
Great question. All right.
Because I'm just wondering where she is in this whole journey.
We met, the first time was 2008.
Okay.
2008, very interesting. I don't know how it happened. I never knew her until I was getting ready to come to the U.S. And to tell you the truth, we met at the U.S. Embassy.
Oh, wow.
Really?
Yes, I was going for a review of my documents to make sure that everything I needed for the interview was right. I went to the education center, and she was also studying to come and study here. She was studying for her graduate record exam. So the first day we bumped into each other, it was raining, and none of the guys who was there, who went there, we didn't have an umbrella. Only the ladies had umbrellas. So the person who was coming to get us into the center said, well, you guys, I don't know what's wrong with you. None of you brought an umbrella. Ladies, would you share your umbrellas with them? And she happened to be the one who shared her umbrella with me. So we became friends from there.
Wow.
I took her number just to say thank you.
Sure.
And yes, sure.
Just want to say thank you later.
So one thing led to the other. We didn't contact each other for some time. I came to the U.S. and I was here, and when I was in BM, it was quite lonely. I didn't know a lot of people. I was quite lonely, and I was trying to reconnect back home, call family, friends, and I called her once just to tell her that I'm successful, I got through it, and I'm here. And she didn't pick. And I was like, oh, you know what? Forget about it. All right. But she called back.
Oh.
And that's how we reconnected.
Yeah.
And we built it. So eventually I asked her to be my girlfriend. She accepted. And then we proceeded. Okay, after some time, will you marry me? I proposed, and he said, oh, sure. Yeah, ask me a few questions, but that's for another time. Yeah, and I passed, and
Did you ask her parents, and that was there a tradition for that?
Yes.
Was there a dowry involved in all of that as well?
So we became friends in 2008. We got married in 2012. So it was more of long distance relationship.
Yeah.
It was tough, But within that period, I went home once. That was 2009, and that helped a lot. It solidified our friendship. She wanted to be sure, and afterward we started planning. So in 2012 we got married. So I went back home, and we have a tradition. We have several ethnic groups in Ghana, and every ethnic group has a different way of approaching marriage. So our ethnic group, we share the same ethnic group, yeah, but different dialect group. So we had to. I don't know. Do you want me to go into a little of?
Give us
the
like a
process?
short, give us a short.
Short of
yeah.
it. So definitely, the first stage, you just visit the parents' home. We call it knocking. It's like you're going to knock. So the knocking process, basically, you go there and then you ask, hey, our son, my dad is the one who does that for me. My son has seen, we say, has seen a flower in your garden. And he so much loves this flower, he's asked that we come and pick it up for him.
Wow.
But we would like to know if this flower is available or it's been taken. And the family will say, well, it's a great news. It's not been taken. And if you want to pick this flower, this is how much it's going to cost you.
Okay.
So they will give us a list of items that we have to bring along. So we take the items. My dad will present them to me, and we start preparing.
Wow.
So when we are ready, we call them, and then we schedule the dates. So when the dates comes, it's a big ceremony with food, singing, dancing. Both families meet. Actually, 4 families will meet. Both my parents' side and then her parents.
Wow.
We meet. We exchange a gift. Well, we provide a gift, and in appreciation, they will thank us with a big gift too.
Wow.
And that's
Wow.
basically the actual marriage.
Man.
And
That's awesome.
So,
Yeah.
so interesting. Thank you for sharing that.
thank you.
So, Ms. Presley,
Wow.
you have to follow that.
Well, okay.
So,
West Texas is not going to be near as exciting.
where are you from? You're from West Texas?
I am from West Texas. I grew up, I was born in a town called Stamford and grew up in Anson. Anson is a 1,700 population town.
Wow.
Yeah, San Marcos High School is larger than the city in which
Oh
I
my
grew up.
goodness.
So, where's that in like relation to any other town that's bigger?
800 miles from El Paso. Everything's
Oh,
800
wow.
miles. No, we are 22 miles north of Abilene.
Okay.
Okay.
So Abilene was our place to go watch
So,
movies.
I'm thinking there's not a lot of black families in that town.
You are correct. Yeah.
How did your family end up there?
Well, the extended story is we have traced our ancestors back to Ghana,
Yeah.
which is pretty cool.
Wow.
Might want to talk to you later.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
And my parents, actually, my dad is the one who moved us to Anson. Long story short, we amongst the slave trade, we ended up in the east side of Texas, right? So my grandmother went to an all-Negro college in Mejia, and that's where in that Mejia, Brenham area, that's where a lot of our family is, and family heritage kind of landed there in Texas. And my grandfather and dad, in an effort to move our family as far away from that as possible, packed up and moved us to that area, to Anson, Abilene. Hobbs is another super small town in that area. Not to be confused with Hobbs, New Mexico. There's actually a Hobbs, Texas, with about 16 people in it.
Wow.
So that's where we and changed our last name in the process.
Really?
So my generation, we're the first generation of Jacksons. Our slave passage was Linville, and so it was very intentional.
Wow.
And my dad passed in 2014, but he would always explain to us that it was intentional to land us in Anson because his thinking was if we were going to learn how to be successful in America, we needed to understand what it's like, and we need to do that in a small pond because the big ponds were too dangerous. And
Wow.
he would always give the big pond, small pond analogy.
So what did he do for a profession?
Yeah, so he was a pastor and a mechanic.
Wow.
And so he pastored in Anson for a while, and then most of my life, when I was 5 years old, he took over Greater Zion Baptist Church in Sweetwater, Texas,
Oh, wow.
which is where my mom grew up. And he pastored there until he passed away 6 years ago.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So I guess, you know, my life is pretty straight lined. I mean, it's a beeline. I grew up in Anson. My mom still lives in the house where that I left in
Really?
1993. Yes.
Wow.
And I was 11 years old when my dad asked me what I was going to do when I got out of high school. And I told him I wanted to work with teenagers. I didn't say high school kids because I didn't know any better. But he said, "You're not a teenager," and I said, "I know, but this is what I want to do."
Wow.
And he said, "Okay, we'll get you there." And so the rest is really a straight line.
Wow.
But
That's
when you
awesome.
talk about the callings on our lives, it's one of
Yeah.
the things that he's always stressed.
Right.
Is find what you're supposed to do, not
Yes.
necessarily what you want to do.
Oh,
So what was it
yes.
like how old were you when you moved there?
To Anson?
Yeah.
I was born there.
Oh, you were born there?
Yeah, Stanford. Only reason I was born in Stanford is because they stopped delivering babies in '74.
Oh.
In Anson, for whatever reason, Dr. Andrus moved his shop or place. So, I mean, literally, we talk about people first name. It's just the way it is. Moved it over to Stanford. So I was born there, but you know,
Okay.
2 or 3 days later, I went home to Anson.
What was it like being black in that area?
You know, so it was interesting because we didn't. Let me preface this. My dad also told us for a long time that racism didn't exist.
Interesting.
And it's not that he didn't. Now I know it's not that he didn't know any better. I mean, he was born in the 30s. He was in his 30s and the 60s, in the middle of the civil rights movement. I think, in retrospect, he didn't want us to use that as a crutch, and he didn't want us to miss out on, like Darlene. He didn't want us to miss out on those positive relationships because we were afraid, or we ourselves had put up the wall or the block, right? So. I honestly didn't, I mean, I knew I was different, and it really didn't bother me until I got to college.
Okay.
That was when I had some of the harder times really understanding what was going on.
Was that here? Or where did you go to?
Yes, it was here. I went to a couple other schools, but it was here.
Yeah.
And that's when it hit hard.
Really?
But growing up, I mean, I'm still Facebook friends and keep up with some of my old buddies from back home. There were a few instances in elementary school. I remember I was in kindergarten, and I want to say his name, but I won't. But he's still a good friend of mine, and we laugh about it all the time. And we would get questions like, "Are you black all over?" or you know, those kind. But that's not when you're talking about a 5-year-old. That's not racist. That's
Curiosity.
Curiosity. I haven't been exposed to anyone that doesn't look like me, right?
Yeah,
So in the moment, I'm like, why are you asking that? That's just
Right.
rude. And I remember going home talking to my mom about it. And in retrospect, it's just that's just a 5-year-old who's never been exposed.
Right.
Yeah.
Sure.
So I went all the way through high school, and a couple of times, once I got to high school, like my friends would point out, you talk differently when you're with so-and-so and so-and-so than you do with us. And I'm like, really? I don't get that. But other than that, there was no pressure. I did everything that every other high school kid did. I was, band, cheerleading, sports. We just lived our lives. And, our church was predominantly African American, and we had a strong family unit. And I think that just, that helped me, I guess, embrace my identity. So it wasn't really a question or an issue outside of that.
That is enormous.
Right there.
It sounds like your
Yes.
dad was a huge
He was sharp,
role model.
super sharp. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So whenever you said big pond, little pond, and that, what do you think your dad perceived as the bigger threat being in a bigger pond? And what was or do you know what his thought was in that and using that analogy?
Yeah, and I'm just talking right now, right? Because
Yeah.
I can't go home and ask him.
Yeah, sure.
My dad was also, so he was the only first, and I think to this day, the only African American business owner in Anson.
Wow.
He was the first, and I think to this day, the only school board member and school board president of African descent to sit on the board.
Wow.
My sister was the first black cheerleader. The Jacksons just had all those things going on.
Mm-hmm.
I think he had such a huge influence, and he knew that he could have an influence in that small space.
Yeah.
That I want to say that's why.
Yeah.
If he were in a larger city, he might be able to have that kind of influence in his smaller community, but wouldn't have it overall. He couldn't just walk into the mayor's office and say, look, we had our own parking spot in high school.
Yeah. Yeah.
And a new coach came in town and she parked in our spot, and we were like, dude, that's our spot. And so we had to go tell the principal that this lady is parking in the Jackson spot. Like, all 5 of us parked in that spot between the band hall and the gym. I mean, I still know where it is. I think
great.
that might be part of it, is that he
Yeah.
knew that he could have influence and relationships with lots of
Yeah.
people to make sure that they knew who he was. So if they saw his children out,
Right.
then you know what they stood for. And if you see him out of line, he didn't mind, folks calling home. But
So tell us, when you got to college and you began to experience a different thing, I mean, I would love to hear some examples
I
of
wanted
that.
to say something real quick just about that. It's just the power of smaller community. I mean, and I've heard stories over the years of, smaller communities can be toxic in some ways and have that potential, but I love that he saw this opportunity there. And so much of our culture here in America is stretched so thin and big and wide everywhere that it's hard to make those connections and have that influence unless you have a smaller space to have that. So
yeah.
I love that.
And he knew a lot more than he unveiled us as kids. Like, he would buy, if he was going to buy a car, because you have to have a preacher car. You got to have a preacher car, and then he had to have his work car. So
Wow.
if he was going to
You got a
purchase
preacher car, baby?
we got to get you a preacher car, Pastor.
I got a truck.
It's a must. So if he was about to either replace his truck, his work truck, or if he was about to purchase his preacher car, he always said, you got to have, this sounds so awful, you got to have a nice car to drive to the funerals, because you're right behind the hearse, and the preacher has to, I don't know,
Have a nice car.
he was a funny guy. But he would make sure that we had a real good savings in the bank before he purchased the car.
Yeah.
Because he knew that once someone saw him, saw that maybe the family might be doing well, that his business would go down for a little while. And so he would always prepare for about 3 to 5 months. And he did share that with us once we were older, of dings to the business until the hyper excitement around that car. And again, remember, we're in a small town, so everybody's
Yeah.
watching everybody.
Sure.
And So,
Well,
Sorry.
would you mind sharing us a couple examples of what it was like when you did go to college and you all of a sudden experienced something different, what that was like?
yeah. So I started at Weatherford College outside of Fort Worth. It's a real small community college. And what I first realized, friends that were African American from other cities, larger cities like Dallas, Fort Worth, Houston. They started picking on me because there were certain songs that I didn't know that I guess I was supposed to know. And even my kids, they still do it, because I'm like, I don't know who that is and whatever. But and then there were certain songs that I knew the words to, and certain songs that I didn't. And so I started to get labeled. Like, that's when and that's light, that's minor. But that's when it started hitting me that, oh, wow, I guess I am a little different, or my background put me in a different space. And it wasn't until I came here, and it wasn't on our campus, it was, I worked at the Walmart warehouse in New Braunfels. So my senior year, that's how I put myself through school. And I remember leaving, this is the very first time it ever just hit me in the face. had a lunch break, and I went to a little gas station or something to buy. I don't even know what I bought, but grabbed something for lunch. And I was in a hurry to get back because, time was ticking. I pulled out. Well, apparently I pulled out in front of a truck. Okay, I'm sorry. Honk, honk, all that stuff. Well, the truck follows me to Walmart. Guy gets out of his car and he commenced to yell, "You beeping N-word. If you ever beep, beep, beep in front of me again, I swear I'll kill you." I had never in my life experienced blatant racism, like never, never. And at this point, I'm probably 23, 22. And so I remember going into the warehouse, and I was literally shaking.
Yeah, of course.
And my husband, who was a boyfriend, he's the reason I came down here. I was starting, didn't, and followed him, but he was there, and he was like, "Everything's gonna be fine," and this is just the way it is. And he grew up in South Carolina, so he had a different experience, and he's half Korean and half black, and so he's been hit on so many different fronts. He was like, "Dude, this is what life is about. Just you kind of gotta breathe through it and keep going." So that was the first time that it was just blatantly in my face, and then growing and moving through my professional realms, that's where I see it more than I ever did when I was in school. Again, small town, protective dad.
Yeah.
May have made the difference.
So you started, you got your degree in education, and then you got your master's in education. Is that right? At Texas State or Southwest? And then did you teach for a while and then get into administration, or how did that journey go?
Yeah, so I graduated in '99 and taught 1 year in Killeen, middle school English, and then me and Baby Jesus had a good talk, and we both agreed that that's not the space for me. So I went to a job fair actually in Austin and ran into human resources in Lockhart.
Okay.
And they took my resume, and I started teaching there in 2000. I taught 9th grade English for 5 years in Lockhart, and then I taught English here in San Marcos. I moved to San Marcos in 2005. Taught there, and then went back to school in 2006, I suppose, somewhere around there, and started my master's while I was teaching here. So I served at San Marcos High School as an AP as well from 2007 to like 13, and then went back to Lockhart where I started teaching and served as the principal at the freshman campus.
Wow.
So that was fun.
Yeah.
What a journey.
It was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And then shortly after that, I don't know if you know now, they've closed that building, and we saw that come in. They were about a year out from shutting it down and merging with the high school, which means, they were kind and had a position for me, and it wasn't the position that I felt I was supposed to be doing at the time. And Lehman opened up, and we've lived in Kyle since 2008, and so that seemed perfect. For our family. It was right across the street.
Yeah.
So went to Lehman, and San Marcos was just kind of felt like home for a long time. I landed here in '96, and then so when that opportunity opened up, we took it. Our kids stayed here. My oldest came with me to Lehman, but the other two stayed here, and then she came back after her 2 years with me there.
Okay.
Wow.
So you were saying that you have seen some racism as you've progressed through your career. Has it been hard to get those positions, or how have you seen that happen?
It's not been hard to get those positions. I think, and I know you believe the same thing, you're going to be exactly where you're supposed to be. And so when that time, when the time comes, and there are certain things that I look for. We know if God is in the middle of it, it's super easy. Like, it just flows. And so every transition that I've made has been very easy. Very easy. Things line up for my family. They've lined up for me. Awesome. So it's not necessarily in getting the positions, it's what you see when you get there. So like there was a time when I took a principal position, and I'm not going to name schools, but There was one school where a father refused to shake my hand and told me that I couldn't work with his kid.
Oh, my
Well,
goodness.
the irony is, by the end of the year, the kid loved me, and dad was still whatever. But and I thought, that's perfect, though. That's perfect. That's the way that thing changes. Is that we work with our kids,
Yeah.
and change their minds, right?
Yeah.
So we've ran into that. There was another position when I was announced publicly as the principal at this school. We ended up having to call the police because there were, on the Facebook announcements, it was go back and play with your monkeys, and we don't want your kind here, blah blah blah. So it goes on and on, right? And so then I started receiving some private messages that were pretty bad.
Yeah.
And they didn't come out and just say we're going to kill you. And there were videos of a black woman getting shot.
Oh my gosh.
Over it was an animation, and so it just kept happening over and over. And she'd get up and shot by and there were white men holding the gun shooting her. So that was eventually. It was like, okay, I told my assistant superintendent, I said, we got to go to police now, because now I feel like
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
family is in in danger.
Yeah.
So
That's so
there have been
intense.
some intense moments.
Yeah, no
like that.
question. No question.
How do you deal with that? Like, yes, you call the police. What's going on in your mind? I guess, maybe what I wanted to ask you earlier was how did your father and mother and growing up in that environment affect the way you process some of these things when it comes now versus if you would have grown up in this area? I mean, I don't know, I'm just thinking of...
I think, I honestly think that the way they raised us puts me in a place to realize that there is good in everyone, and then there's just some blatant fools out there that they just have to be what they are.
Yeah.
And sometimes it means exposing them, and sometimes it means you just let that go, because that's one person, and then you have a school with 2,000, 2,400 kids, 2,200 kids that really need you to be on point, and really need you to show them what love looks like, and really need you to show them what, in all its reality, what African American looks like.
Yeah.
This is not somebody you need to be afraid of, and we're going to run into people that are disruptive.
Yeah.
And that can't stop us from doing our work.
Right. So much strength and so much of a testament to the power of God in your life. I mean, to keep moving forward and to not let that paralyze you out of fear, one, which, I mean, that's a serious thing to have those threats made, and then to choose to move forward and serve the community you're in, and love those kids, which is so true. I mean, that's what they so much need, is your presence and your example, and what a gift. And it's just beautiful that you, it just speaks to, I mean, I can just see that those things are not just happenstance, but it is a spiritual thing, that strength that you have that has helped you through that.
Very much so.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
You both. It's interesting. You said something like West Texas is not going to compare to Ghana, but in some ways, y'all have a lot of similarities in that you sort of came from foreign lands into, into San Marcos, and you both have really strong families that helped establish your identity early on, so that when things rattled you, from what I'm hearing, you didn't just wonder is everything done? Am I lost? But your family rooted you in that this is who you are, and you know you can be proud of it. And then there's with what's going on in the world right now, in the U.S. right now, there's so much fear, and there's so much questions, and so many things that we don't know, and Black Americans are struggling with who can I trust, and what should I do? Who's going to stand with us? All these things. What I'd love to hear kind of both of y'all speak to that as what you have you have kids now that are teenagers, and you have a young boy and two girls.
Yes.
And so as they're growing up and facing being pulled over or dealing with other people, what is it that you are imparting to them? Is there things that you're struggling with or nervous about, or
Just gonna sit here and say, There is. It's scary. There's a little school down the street from where we live, and my son and my daughter, they go shoot there sometimes in a little park next to it. And I found myself a week ago. It started getting dark. Now, typically we just let them walk home. It's less than half a mile from the house. And I went down and told my husband, I was like, you need to go get them. They'll be home in a minute. No, you need to go get them. Because there's just this fear that
Yeah.
golly,
it's okay.
that somebody's gonna hurt my babies.
Sure.
And then I'm going to jail.
Yeah.
But I just I worry about it,
Yeah.
and they're amazing kids,
Let me get some tissue.
but it doesn't I know I saw some down there.
Yeah.
That won't matter to some people.
Right.
And even them, thank you. We've been incredibly fortunate in that they've not had any serious experiences like that yet, and they've been able to develop in a pretty stable social emotional environment, fairly say as whatever normal looks like.
Yeah.
And you've probably seen me say that on Facebook. My children really have not. They've gone through San Marcos CISD and have not had any experiences until this year. But my son was playing in a game at a different district, and the adults and peers were heckling, and I could see it in his face. He was so nervous. When he got in the car, he was just like, "Mom, they were calling us N-words," and he was just like, "Wow, did that just happen in 2020?"
Seriously.
So yes, we live with that fear, and what I tell them is, I mean, we have to just preach being safe.
Yeah.
Be safe, be kind, be respectful. I'm not one of those parents that, and this another thing that came from my dad. He didn't. You don't have to say yes sir and no sir to anyone unless you respect them. And I know we have sometimes, our society, we say that's a sign of respect. And where my dad is coming from, growing up in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, he had to say it even if people didn't respect him.
Yeah.
And so what he taught his children is respect is earned, and you don't be disrespectful. You say yes and no, and if you really love them, say yes, sir. And so I think, just instilling those same things with our kids, I'm still processing, to be honest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I've since become a little mama bear. I'm probably overbearing right now.
Yeah. Well, I am very thankful that you shared those stories with us, and I know that there's many more, or maybe there are some more, but I want to say that it shocks me that that's happening in 2020. I just can't. I see things that happen, and it's just hard to believe it. I mean, there's been many movies come out recently that profile different things that have happened throughout the last 50 years with, or 60 years with, you know, from Selma to the Jackie Robinson movie and many different ones. And when we watch those movies, we're just sickened, and we think, how could anyone treat someone like that? And there's this idea that it doesn't happen anymore. And then, especially being white, and thankfully I'm around people that are, the people that I'm around aren't that way either. And so they're not saying those things, and I can begin to think that, well, it's done. It's not a big deal anymore. But these situations that are across the news reveal and have allowed us to have these conversations, to hear from our friends, you know, that this is happening from time to time. So I want to let you know that we love you dearly, and we're here for you and your kids. We love them dearly, and we're here to support you and to protect and do whatever we can. And you are leading many, many people, young teenagers, and San Marcos.
And everybody else around. You got a lot.
Teachers.
A lot of people.
You've just gone through the hardest school year probably ever for teachers, with having to lead from home. But in San Marcos, there's obviously this interesting dynamic of, there is a substantial white population, there is a very large Hispanic population, and a black population. And so there is 3 different cultures mixing and mingling at the school. And so before the coronavirus break, what are your thoughts on this generation growing up? Is there any soundbite that you can give us about how do you feel like where we're at? Where could we focus on? Is there anything that as people that live in San Marcos should be thinking through?
I think, one, this generation is powerful. And this kind of dialogue needs to start happening with this group quickly, because they are smart, they are powerful, and they are, for lack of a better word, the most stubborn group of kids I've ever seen in my life. And I'm talking across the board. Probably over the last 7 years, I've seen this extremely strong-headed youth come through our buildings, and it's amazing. I mean, so we actually, the principal before me had already established it, but I continued because I loved it. She has this principal's council where we'd call in about 20 or 30 kids and just sit down and talk, and they'll tell you how to run a school. They'll tell you how to run it. I mean, it's awesome. And they have some really good ideas. They are out of the box. They are super smart, very innovative, and very strong-headed. And I think if we can channel that and create a space of more connectivity, America's going to be a completely different place. And it has to happen, because if it starts to fragment, they're still innovative, smart, and strong-headed. And if they're fragmented and they think that one group is one way and another group is another way, then we could also be on the brink of some of the most the darkest years that America has seen. So I think that's that time and space of not listening to our youth has to diminish quickly. I love what our valedictorian said in his speech. Bless his heart. He's hilarious and very bright. And he just said, you know, our leaders are, I can't remember his exact words, but the sentiment was our leaders are struggling, so it's our time. Wow. And he, to me, he was spot on. We just need to do better at creating a way for them to connect in a more positive light.
Wow.
That's good.
So one quick question about that. How did he give his speech? Did y'all have a ceremony?
We
or-
did the whole virtual thing. So our
Okay.
goal is to have a real ceremony on July 17th, but we did a little mini virtual
Okay.
type graduation. Yeah.
Will that be at the school or
It'll be
Strahan?
at
or
Rattler Stadium. Yeah, Strahan is shut down until December.
December. Wow. Okay.
Yeah, I know.
And so you'll be in the stadium, and will there be people there, or will it just be the seniors, or?
The goal is is to have people. So students will bring up to 4 guests,
Okay.
and we'll spread them out 6 feet
Yeah.
apart. The logistics are just
Yeah.
blowing my mind even as
Yeah.
we talk about it. And then we spread them out over the football field
Yeah.
and put the stage under the Jumbotron. And if you're sitting far, far in the back because you have to be so far away from the person in
Yeah.
front of you, then you can watch on the Jumbotron.
Nice.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's great.
We're fortunate to have the space.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
Well, if you need some ushers, our people have been practicing that for,
Yeah, really.
for a month or so.
We may give you a call.
Any other thoughts before we close? Any other thoughts while we've been sitting here?
Well, thank you so much for sharing that. And that is something always, because I have some friends and sometimes we debate about some of these issues because we are coming from outside looking inside, and our experiences are totally different. So I'm always careful and humble to acknowledge that. And like you pointed out, there are times where I've heard of these kind of tensions, because one thing I've heard is, oh, a lot of Africans don't really understand what African Americans are going through. And I've seen some videos of some Africans saying that, oh, you know what, the society is so open, you can be whatever you are, and this and blah, blah, blah. And if you're complaining, then you are lazy and all that. However, I always look back and I say that, we have a proverb in my language which says that the person who sits closer to the fire is actually the one who knows how it feels, how hot it is. If you're far away, you might think, it's just nothing.
Right.
So a lot of people they were born here, and they have been going through these experiences for a whole long time. And therefore, sometimes we have to be very careful. We have to always relax and listen before we pass judgment. So from my experience looking from outside, one thing I've come to acknowledge, and that's why I said communication is very important. This is my general theory, that it looks like most of these things are just embers or aftermath of what America has gone through in the past.
Yeah.
And the recent one, segregation and coming.
Right.
And even though there is no sanctioned segregation, however, in our communities and all that, you see some traces of it, and that tend to breed some of these distrusts. So, for example, let's say if I'm an African American growing in a different culture, a different side of town, I grew up with different sets of beliefs and prejudices and then ideologies and all that, without opening up to the other side, not knowing anything about it. And then suddenly I'm thrusted into that portion. It's always going to breed tensions. And the same way, let's say a white person grew up from that side, not knowing anything, not communicating on the other side. And then suddenly this person has become a cop. Can you imagine? And then you tell this person, go and police this community. So I've realized in my culture, we tend to talk a lot with moving our hands and talking loud. Another person from a different culture would say, oh, that's rude. Why is he throwing his hands all over the place? But that is normal. It doesn't mean I'm being rude or being disrespectful, but that's my culture.
Yeah.
And for example, walking around here, using the thumbs up
Yeah.
is normal. in their cultures in my country, a thumbs up is an insult, a big insult.
Wow.
And therefore, if you don't know those things, one of my professors was saying his friend, who is an American, came to visit him, and they went to a funeral in Ghana to this culture. And now, people saw him, and they were all applauding, seeing this white American guy come walking around. So the gentleman thought, he was pleased, and he was giving thumbs up to everyone. So he did a double thumbs up. And suddenly the faces of the people changed. It was, what is he trying to do? So those are some of the, differences. And I feel the more we communicate and the more we kind of engage each other, some of these understanding will be. And like I said, when I was coming from Ghana, I had my own ideas. First of all, I thought, everybody in America is rich. I had that kind of notion, And when I saw some homeless people, I was like, wait a minute, I was never told this, And I began to reconfigure my thinking.
Sure.
In the same way, if I'm exposed to the other side and then begin to engage and talk, I believe some of these tensions might go down. It's just a matter of we are not communicating very well. There is this kind of differences, blocks that have been created.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons why I'm not really for homogeneous kind of groupings on campuses, because there are a lot of times, even though we're coming from different, but we come to campus and then we begin to engender, like we keep on. I feel like we have to mix. I understand. I always feel more comfortable being with people
like you,
like me.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm talking too much, but like when I go to programs, parties, I watch a lot. I go to programs or parties. Whenever I sit, I watch people, how people sit. A lot of time, most of my African friends will just come and sit by me. And then other whites will come, and then they will congregate. Hispanics will congregate. And I'm like, why is that? And I began to ask, we tend to flow towards places we are more comfortable with. It could be ideology, it could be color, it could be certain things. And I'm hoping that as we have begun these conversations, the more we interact with each other, we can understand better.
Yeah.
What are your fears? What are your concerns? Why do you do this? I'm a cop. I don't want you to do this. When you do some of these things, it's rude and I'm threatened. And in the same way, as an African, I should be able to tell, no. When I'm talking loud and all that, it doesn't mean I'm trying to attack you or something.
Right.
And this could be very simple, but that's my general overview.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping that, so anyway.
Well, I
Thank you.
want the conversation to keep going. And the one thing that Jesus was really adamant about, and the people that he was most upset with, were the people that thought they had it all together and thought they knew everything. And so if there's one message that I'm hoping to get out, is that if we think we have it all together, or we think we know everything about another race or whatever, we're ignorant and we're self-righteous. And I have been examining my heart and my mind and thinking, is there anything in me that has been prejudiced? Is there anything in me that has been biased? Have I done anything? Have I said anything? Have I acted in any way? And just tried to really dig deep. And the conversations that I've had have helped me, because when things are said and I either disagree or they hurt me, like the things you've said today, I don't disagree with, but they hurt me, and I think, how have I said anything or done anything? And so thank you all so much for, was there anything else you wanted to add?
Just thank you. Thank you for being bold and brave enough to have these conversations, and being bold and brave enough to be introspective. That's hard because everybody wants the problem to be out there, and it is incredibly internal. It doesn't matter what color you are. It is incredibly internal for all of us. And so we all have to figure out what our contribution is to the problem, regardless of what color we are, and what our contribution is to the solution.
Yeah.
So I appreciate both of you for leading this in San Marcos.
Thanks.
Did you have any other?
No, I'm just trying not to cry.
I got tissue.
Good.
We're all trying. That's all good. Well, thank you all so much for joining us. The conversation continues. I want to challenge you to go out and have a talk. Have a talk with people. Get to know people. Get connected. Ask questions. And be the light wherever you go.